This is episode 121 of the Death to Tyrants podcast. Hey guys, let's take a minute to talk about one of our sponsors, and that is Lorenzotti Coffee. I love these guys, not just because they were our very first sponsor, but because, like I've said many times, their coffee is so damn good. If you guys like coffee that tastes the way coffee is actually supposed to taste, with natural flavors that come from the region and the roast of the beans rather than from artificial flavorings like some other brands use, well, then you'll love Lorenzotti Coffee. If you're a real coffee drinker like myself, you don't want these weird flavors in your coffee like key lime pie or blueberry muffin. You want strong, traditional flavors that actually come from the beans themselves, and that's exactly what you get with Lorenzotti Coffee. You can get Lorenzotti's signature Venetian blend. This stuff comes right from Italy, okay? You can do whole beans, medium fine grind, which that one's actually perfect to use in the French press like I prefer. It comes in these really cool, beautifully designed, resealable tins that ship to you hermetically sealed and keep the coffee very, very fresh. Guys, I cannot speak highly enough of Lorenzotti. They're lovers of liberty. They love this show. They support this show. So why not support them by getting yourself some damn good coffee? So go to lorenzotti.coffee. That is LORENZOTTI.coffee. Guess what? We got a promo code, and that, as you know, is DTTP for Death to Tyrants podcast. You'll get 10% off your order at checkout. Again, that's lorenzotti.coffee. Enter code DTTP at checkout. Let's get to the show.
The crushing weight of the tyrant's passage had left nothing unmarked.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
What is up, you guys? Welcome back to another edition of the Death to Tyrants podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Austin, Texas once again. And last week, that was a big one. Ron Paul here on the show. There's only a few people that are worthy of following such a giant guest. Well, I went and got one of them. Ron Paul's personal close friend, founder and chairman of the greatest organization on the planet, that being the Mises Institute. Of course, I've got Lew Rockwell here on the show today. Let me tell you, so the reason I got Lew on is because some of you guys might be familiar with back in the day, the 90s, there was a great publication that Lew put out called the Rothbard-Rockwell Report. And that was a collaboration between Lew Rockwell and Murray Rothbard. And it was kind of a newsletter of sorts. And it covered all kinds of stuff, the politics of the day, all the way up to movie reviews by Murray Rothbard. And just as a side note, you can get many of the essays from the Rothbard-Rockwell Report in a great book called The Irrepressible Rothbard. And I genuinely highly recommend that. It's good stuff to see just the dynamic thinking that Murray Rothbard did on all kinds of topics. How does one man know so much about so many things? Well, check out that book. So back to what I was discussing, one of the things that was made famous within those pages is a piece that Lew Rockwell penned called The Case for Paleo Libertarianism. And it was also a little bit related to something Murray Rothbard penned around the same time. It wasn't called The Case for Right-Wing Populism, but it essentially was that, and a strategy for the right that Rothbard was writing about. And that was for libertarians to embrace social conservatism, paleo conservatism mixed with libertarianism, right-wing populism. It was basically, at the time, they were backing Pat Buchanan for president. And so I want to get into why Lew wrote that piece and how it relates to where we are now, because there are some similar parallels, I believe. Lew wrote it because the Libertarian Party type of libertarians were seen as more of a libertine, anything goes type group of people, and it seemed to really turn off most Americans. For instance, it seemed like libertarianism was hostile to social norms, just because legalization of something like prostitution it seemed to mean even moral approval of it back then. And so Lew said, enough is enough. We still care about tradition, family, religious values, and we are libertarians. And so that was the case for Paleo Libertarianism that Lew was making. And then, like I mentioned, Rothbard's piece on right-wing populism in support of Patrick Buchanan, and he went over a list of things that would be a kind of a coalition with right-wing populists that would extend an olive branch to them, things that we could agree on and yet still be real libertarians. And it's interesting stuff. I love it, to be honest with you. So, having said all of that, does it sound similar to where we are now? The LP often, extending the olive branch to the left, speaking in a language that at least we're trying to, not we, the official Libertarian Party, trying to sound lefty, if you will, with hashtag BLM and all of that kind of stuff. Well, it turns off a lot of people. Is that the wisest way to go about your political strategy? So, I don't know. We're going to find that out here when I talk to Lew Rockwell. Of course, you guys know who he is. Like I mentioned, he is founder and chairman of the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, editor over at lewrockwell.com, and author of several excellent books, the newest one, of course, being Against the Left. And I think if you look in the first few pages of that one, you'll see this podcast was a sponsor of that book. How cool is that? Anyway, I have for you the chairman and founder of the Mises Institute. Welcome the great Lew Rockwell back to the show. Lew, how are you?
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, I want to chat with you today about a political strategy that you and Murray Rothbard made fairly famous back in the early 90s, and that's the Paleo Libertarian strategy. I believe in one piece, Murray referred to it also as right populism. It was written about in the Rothbard-Rockwell reports. And before we get into the details of it, and I want to relate it to where things are now in 2020 as well, can you talk about what the Rothbard-Rockwell report was and why that came about?
Well, it was Murray's idea. He suggested it, and he and Bert Blumert suggested the name. Bert was the publisher. So it was it was such a pleasure to be involved in that publication. I can remember when there would be some event happening the night before, and that I knew Murray would be interested in. And the next morning there'd be like a 20 pages in my fax machine of an article he'd written overnight. That would just be, of course, brilliant, beautifully written, beautifully organized. I mean, he was a genius. I mean, he was just an extraordinary man, and to have my name associated with his, of course, it was a little bit like the Socrates Smith report or something. But it was of course tremendous fun. Bert was a very great man, and just tremendous fun to know and to be involved with too. So to be able to work with those two just was an honor and a thrill.
Yeah, I've read that Murray and you might have had quite a different schedule from one another back then.
Well, Murray was, definitely a night guy. I mean, he would get up sometime, typically after noon, and work until after midnight. But he was, that might seem odd to most people, but it certainly didn't hinder him at all. He wrote, I remember Walter Block telling Murray how proud he was that he wrote, X number of pages a day. And what did Murray write? I mean, he had a hard time getting Murray to tell him, but it was like 3 or 4 times as many. So Murray, this is great scholarly stuff. I remember one story. He was in California one summer working at the Institute for Humane Studies, which was then in California, headed by Baldy Harper, the great libertarian, a very different operation these days, of course. So Murray had a guest over, spending a couple days, and the guy said, "Murray, I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Cato Institute conference next week." And Murray said, "That conference is not next week." He said, "It's sometime in the future." And he asked Joey, and she said, "No, it's next week, Murray." So Murray excused himself, went into the next room, and typed out the entire paper this was on New Deal monetary policy, complete with footnotes, bibliography, He'd already written it in his head, and it was a very long paper, and he just typed it out. So that Murray was just what a great man, and how lucky we were to have him, whether at the Mises Institute or at the Rothbard-Rockwell Report. The Rothbard-Rockwell Report. He, I can't say enough good about him. He wrote so many important books, had occupied himself with so many important subjects. He was a genius in a whole bunch of areas. I mean, whether it's American history, of course, Austrian economics, libertarianism, he just philosophy. He was an expert in all of these areas. He knew enough in all of these areas to be a great academic expert, if that was all he'd known. And of course, he had his enemies. I mean, the Cato people came to hate him when Charles Koch, who was the funder of Cato, decided that he hated Murray, and so all the people followed along with that. But Murray, he never let that sort of thing stop him. I know that Cato Institute, interestingly enough, was set up as a stockholder nonprofit, and there are some states that allow that. And they had talked Murray into keeping his shares of stock in their safe rather than he might be unsafe in his home. Unfortunately, that's so. Once they decided to fire him, they in effect stole his stock. They wouldn't allow him to have it, and so he went to a top lawyer in New York, and lawyer said, "Murray, no question, the right is on your side, but you don't have the money to pursue this. These people are billionaires. They'll string it out for a very long time. They'll make you spend a vast amount of money, and in the end, you won't win just because of the money question, not because you're not right." So he didn't pursue it any further, but he didn't. That didn't stop him. I mean, he had things happen in his life. There were various things that he had to overcome in terms of getting his PhD, blocked by the evil Arthur Burns, who was then probably the most famous professor at NYU in the economics department. And even though he was not on Murray's panel, I mean, he's not on Murray's group of professors who were overlooking his PhD thesis, this was his great book on the Panic of 1819, still cited today, I might add, by people who write about that subject. So Arthur Burns said, "This is not worthy of you, Murray. You got to redo the whole thing or do something else." And of course, Murray had spent years doing this, and if Burns had never left NYU, Murray might never have had a PhD. It's a frightening thought. Burns, thank goodness, was, although not for the country, was made head of the Fed. First of all, the head of the Council of Economic Advisors by Eisenhower, and then head of the Fed by Richard Nixon. But anyway, that got him out of New York, and so Murray, and he had so much influence in the department, even though he was not normally have anything to say about Murray's PhD, he was actually able to block it. But Murray got the PhD, but of course, given his views, it was difficult for him to get a job, then as now. And he did finally get a job because the people at Brooklyn Polytechnic, which was I think it's now part of NYU, ironically, because the professors there loved his views on the Vietnam War. Of course, he was an expert on the Vietnam War, hated the Vietnam War like all wars, and he was just a genius about that as well as everything else. Murray said he didn't actually think they knew his other views, but they assumed he was just a leftist. So anyway, he got hired and spent some years there until he went to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, bringing Hans Hermann Hoppe with him, and they had a great time there for the rest of Murray's life. But Murray, I mean, he should have been, of course, and could have been at Harvard or any top school. He would have had a Nobel Prize if he'd just been willing to just change his views a little bit. But of course, he wouldn't do it. He would never give in. He was advised by Milton Friedman and others that, you got to do this and that to be successful in the Friedmanite sense. Of course, he wouldn't do it. But he was always happy. I mean, always a jolly, happy guy, always optimistic, very, very generous. I remember one of his friends who'd been a student at the time talking later after Murray had passed about his unbelievable generosity of himself and his wife, Joey. He said, here is Murray making a small salary at Brooklyn Polytechnic, and he would invite them over, and he would serve what seemed to them unlimited amounts of liquor, which they were happy to drink. But he said in later years he thought, how could he afford that? I mean, and we never stopped to think that maybe we should bring some to help out. But he was such an extraordinary guy, so brilliant. Had a friend who took some courses from him at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and he said Murray would start teaching the minute he walked into the room. He would start lecturing from the back of the room as he walked up to the front, and then until the class was over. He had so much to say. He knew so much, of course. He was so interesting, so compelling, just an extraordinary man. And of course, Mises saw this, so Mises saw Murray as his successor, and based on his economic work. But like Mises, who was also an historian and was a genius in many other areas, Murray was the legitimate heir to Ludwig von Mises. And at the Mises Institute, of course, we're so thrilled to have these two men as our guides, and two unbelievable world historic geniuses in a row. We were very, very lucky to have them, and they were just extraordinary men, just unbelievably extraordinary. Both of them never had much money, as Mises told his fiancée Margaret when he asked her to marry him. He said, or his then to become fiancée, he said, "I'm going to write much about money, but I'm never going to have much of it." And of course, that was true. And he knew, and of course, Murray was the same. And yet it never hindered him. I mean, he just so optimistic, so friendly, so open to anybody, happy to answer anybody's question. People would phone him, and he would just be happy to talk to them. Except I remember there was one guy who phoned him during the daytime and woke him up and said, "Professor Rothbard, on page so-and-so of Man, Economy, and State, you say thus and so, and on page thus and so, you say something else. And isn't this a contradiction?" And then he went to, and Murray said, he said, "No, it's not, and sorry, I'm going back to bed," and he hung up. But generally, he was just, he was more than happy to talk to anybody about anything, and he was always looking for just a tiny spark of intelligence, of the fact that this person might be able to do something significant in economics or history or any other area, and he'd try to fan the flames. I mean, we would work with them. He was so generous with his time. I miss him every day still, and I think everybody who knew him feels the same way. I'm not alone in that.
One of the things he was good at, one of the many things, like you're saying, is talking about certain aspects of culture and American culture and Western civilization, and you guys did that in the Rothbard-Rockwell Report. I've been doing a series of episodes on what I will call the culture wars in this country. You would probably agree that sometimes libertarians, certainly Libertarianism Incorporated, we'll call it, they have problems discussing the culture war. Sometimes it seems maybe even there's attempts to appeal to the language and sympathies of the left. And to me, especially in this current climate, that's a losing cause. When I reread pieces like yours, The Case for Paleo Libertarianism, obviously I realize it's not 1990 anymore. A lot of things have changed, but man, there are some points you make in there that are so perfectly suited, I think, to where things are now. And I want to read something that you wrote, and I think this is still the case. "No political philosophy exists in a cultural vacuum, and for most people, political identity is only an abstraction from a broader cultural view." Can you talk about why you wrote this piece generally? And for those listening who've not read it, kind of give a synopsis of what this was about.
Well, I was stimulated by the fact that this was Ron Paul was running for the Libertarian Party nomination, and that I got so many reports from people who were Ron Paul supporters who were thrilled, and they would go to a Libertarian Party meeting, and if they were cultural conservatives or and even worse, if they were Christians, they were hated. I mean, they were made fun of. They were demonized and made to feel that they should get the heck out. And I thought this was such an atrocity that, as Murray pointed out, most people through all of human history have been religious. Not all people, but most people. And just from a practical standpoint, and Murray, by the way, was very pro-Catholic. I mean, he was not religious himself, very pro-Catholic, very pro-Christian. And as you can see this in his History of Thought and other writings. And the idea that you, just from a practical standpoint, could be a bunch of Christian-hating atheists, people who would try to argue people out of their religious faith, was such a loser politically. And of course, also, he thought it was wrong morally too, but that it was just, a disaster. And I'm afraid this is probably I haven't had a lot to do with the libertarian movement in a very long time. So it could be that they've changed, but my impression certainly is that they definitely have moved more to the left. So we have people arguing that you have to be a feminist, you have to be an anti-racist full-time, and all, the rest of have to be a BLMer, and all that kind of thing. That, of course, it has nothing to do with libertarianism properly considered, but they definitely want to appeal to the left, the far left, because I guess they feel that that's the what's successful. If the far left ever comes to power, they're not going to last very long.
Right.
None of us will, for that fact. So it's I think it's a losing thing to be a left winger. I think Western civilization is a great civilization, as Vasco Kohlmeyer, who writes about this for LewRockwell.com, pointed out. He said it's the only non-oppressive civilization in history, and it's a great civilization. It's Christian civilization, which Murray glorified in. I remember him having an argument with a left-wing professor once and saying that, Christianity is responsible for the rise of the individual. And the guy said, well, that's ridiculous. And Murray said, well, it's not true. He said it was the Catholic belief that God would have sent his only begotten son to die for the sins of one man. If only one man had needed that, God would have done that. So he said this shows the infinite value of the individual. And it said it was this belief that brought about individualism in the West, and which, of course, is obviously part and parcel of Western civilization. But we have Western civilists under attack everywhere. I can remember when it first started. I think it was at Stanford University, where the chant was, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go." And of course, it has gone. I mean, they don't. Maybe they teach it in graduate school. I don't know, but certainly it's not a course that all the undergraduates take. And that's true every place. It's quite something. On the other hand, there are those of us who defend Western civilization, who think that such things as the family are basic to civilization and also the cause of liberty. It's we have a fight on our hands, but we've always had a fight on our hands, of course. And I thought that I didn't see libertarianism as being part and parcel of leftist, which maybe one could have that impression today when I wrote that article, but I thought it was a very, very dangerous thing to have happen, for that matter, just for the prosperity of the movement, not to bring in all kinds of other questions. I don't know how successful the so-called Paleo Alliance was. It had some successes and a lot of failures, but I think the same ideas are extremely important these days. They're much more under attack. When we have people, supporting Black Lives Matter, supporting the mostly peaceful protests, the killings and the burnings and the lootings, and more than 200 cities have had tremendous damage done to them, and nobody stopped it. And of course, the local people aren't allowed to stop it, or they're going to be arrested, as Kyle Rittenhouse, of course, has discovered. They're going to be the ones prosecuted and hated, not the arsonists, not the looters, not the people who beat up and kill others, but who are on the left. They, of course, are all great guys. So these are extraordinary times, but I think this is all based on Rothbard, really, that the idea that libertarianism has to be joined together with cultural conservatism to be successful, and for that matter, is just because it's true. And probably the greatest exponent of this today is Hans Hermann Hoppe, the great philosopher, economist, and libertarian. Somebody else we're very glad to be associated with at the Mises Institute.
Since we'll call it Trumpian populism or whatever this movement has been, it does seem, from where I'm standing at least, that there are different elements within that movement that seem different. Now, I don't know how long this will last, but for instance, my parents, who were lifelong Republicans, were George Bush supporters, George W. Bush supporters, and so on. And now my dad's verbally, to me, venting about neocons and how they ruined the conservative movement. So, and now, of course, my dad's a giant Trump supporter. And so there are silver linings to this, what everything that's going on, and that some people seem to be, I don't know if you wouldn't even call it red-pilled on certain things. Certainly the lockdowns have opened a lot of people's eyes. And like I said, the neocons and how they'll just side with the Democrats at this point. And a lot of people sit and think, I guess I was fooled all of those years. Now, again, if Nikki Haley is their nominee next time, then maybe it's all back to...
Yeah, what a monster.
Yeah, it's all back to square one. But do you see anything similar to what you saw with the Buchanan movement, where there are alliances or even olive branches to be extended from maybe culturally conservative libertarianism with right populism and Trumpian populism? Do you see any ties there?
By the way, I want to urge everybody to read Murray Rothbard's article on right-wing populism, which you can find on LewRockwell.com. Just go to the search engine and put in Rothbard populism.
Yes.
It's what an extraordinary piece of writing. It was a speech that he gave, just like everything he wrote, just a tremendous piece and very, very relevant to today.
Yes.
So he just whether it's on crime or all the other things that are haunting us today, especially. But Murray was, it's. I apologize, I've lost my train of thought there.
Well, he hit upon something perfect within that. Murray in that lists, I believe it was 8 things that we should be on board with. And again, I read that, and you just see how timeless some of his writing is. You get to the part, take back the streets, crush criminals, not white-collar criminals and inside traders, but violent street criminals, which we're seeing now all over the place. And, you just think, how is he he could see things like, it's amazing how timeless his writing is. So with that article that he wrote and then the Paleo Libertarian stuff that you wrote, do you see any similarities, I guess, to right now where we're at in this current moment with the Trump right versus what seems to be the insanity left mob?
Well, just like the Jeffersonians were far better than Jefferson, and there are many other examples of the Taftians were much better than Robert Taft. The Trumpians, I think, tend to be much better than Trump. Mm-hmm. Certainly Trump's original platform, when the first time he ran, was much more compatible than today's actual, Trump doings in terms of, the vast amount of inflation and the war. He hasn't started any new wars, but he certainly has done some horrible sanctions stuff. So, but his original platform was great. That's why he won. And I think Murray would have loved that. Murray would be probably a critical Trumpian if he were here. He certainly would not have liked Joe Biden, and he would have thought that the left, as always, is the enemy. Ever since the French Revolution, which is sort of the first flowering of the left, the first with the guillotines and just the horrific mass murders that they committed, and brought about outlawing Christianity and redoing everything culturally, knocking down statues, changing the calendar. I mean, all the various things that they did, and it's really been, I won't say it's been downhill since then, but it was a horrible example that we continue, of course, that continued with the Russian Revolution and aspects of the Nazi Revolution, and which was, of course, left wing, and what's going on today. It's terrible stuff. But the left, Murray would say the left has always been the enemy. The right is sometimes the enemy, but much less so than the left. And at least they get some things right on the cultural question. Whether it's the family, whether it's, again, the Western civilization, whether it's religion. And, of course, the left has always hated religion, and we see it very openly today. Maybe it's a good thing that it's so open so we can see who we're dealing with. But the BLMers, the Antifas, I noticed somebody said the other day we ought to call them the Anticas, because they're actually anti-capitalist. They're not, mm-hmm. Of course, they're actually fascists. They're not mm-hmm. anti-fascists. But that's probably a lost cause to call them Anticas. But anyway, they're terrible bunch. There are obviously people funding these guys sending them around the country to do all the horrible things they're doing. George Soros types, I'm sure. And it's, we have a fight on our hands. It is a possibility of a new civil war, and there's no way, the only way to actually prevent that is to allow the breakup of the U.S., another cause that would have been dear to Murray's heart. It was always for secession. And so if we would allow the people who don't agree with Antifa and BLM and the rest of these commies to secede and have their own part of the country, there'd be peace. But the U.S. government, of course, is never going to allow that, or at least they would never allow it willingly anyway. And so who knows what's ahead? I mean, it could be an actual civil war. Certainly it could be a low-intensity civil war. So it's thank goodness Americans are all armed. On the other hand, the Biden people have said openly they will, of course, use guns to confiscate your guns. And if they do that, we just have to see what that brings on. But it's a frightening time. On the other hand, I think we have guides in Rothbard and Hoppe and other people, Jeff Deist, who can help lead us. But the enemy is the enemy is rotten.
Yeah, and I know you said you haven't been paying too much attention to the official LP or anything, but there has been this tendency to, for some reason, reach out to the left and use this language, in the hashtag BLM and stuff like that. To me, once you start using their language, you're falling into a trap. So to try to act like, hey, we're kind of cool with this group, maybe you'll like us over here. It really was telling, I thought, and I hope the LP was watching this, all of the people in their executive board and whatnot, when that mob went after Rand Paul and his wife after the RNC in the street, and we all know that if there were no cops there, it would have been really bad.
Rand thought they were going to kill them.
That's right. And this is a man that authored the Breonna Taylor Act, and that's what they think of us. That's what they think of libertarians, anyone to the right of Bernie Sanders, basically. And I just see it as a mistake for the National LP to continue to extend some olive branch when all they're going to do is use you briefly, and then they'd rather just see you up against a wall. I assume you see the same thing.
Sure, I do. And I must say I thought it was terrible when the National LP, this was, I guess, a few months ago, sent out a tweet praising a big company that had fired someone for the crime of writing on his own Facebook page, "All Lives Matter."
Yes.
They actually praised that. So it's it's not the way to get, but of course they don't want anybody who's not a leftist, I'm afraid to say. And, they'll get, I guess, 2 or 3% like the last time. But on the other hand, they're never going to go out of existence. The Prohibition Party still exists. It was founded in the 1830s. It's still around. So once a party is established and the government blesses its establishment, it's around forever. But is it going to be more than that? I did notice there's a great interview that Murray gave when there was talk of founding a Libertarian Party. He argued against it. He thought it would be a mistake. And once it was founded, he thought, well, I've got to get involved to try to have an effect on it, which, of course, he did have an effect on it. But if you look back at his arguments about why there shouldn't be a Libertarian Party, they seem very prescient.
I want to tell you guys about a great sponsor of the Death to Tyrants podcast, and that is our friends over at Zippix Toothpicks. These are flavored toothpicks. They've got several great flavors. Check these out: cinnamon, clove, mocha, and whiskey even. But not only that, each toothpick actually contains nicotine, and I use these toothpicks all of the time. Not only are they a great alternative to that nasty habit you may be trying to stop, and that includes vaping, come on now, but they taste great. They are way more socially acceptable. They are cheaper than any alternative. Hell, I don't even dip or smoke or anything like that, and I still love these Zippix toothpicks. Out of all the alternatives on the market, these are the most cost-effective, and better yet, they are a sponsor of this show. When a small business is out there helping to support one of your favorite Liberty podcasts like this one, let's thank them by returning the support. Since you are a loyal listener to the Death to Tyrants podcast, you will get 10% off of your order by entering promo code DTTP at checkout when you order over at zippixtoothpicks.com. Once again, go to zippixtoothpicks.com. That's ZIPPIX toothpicks.com and type in promo code DTTP for Death to Tyrants podcast at checkout, and you will get 10% off of your order, and you will be supporting Zippix and Death to Tyrants at the same time. So go do it. Let's get back to the show. Do you think the term libertarian as a label has been ruined beyond repair, or is it still worthy? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it was Murray Rothbard's term, so I'm not willing to give it up, but it's certainly been harmed. I mean, it's been, it just seems it means libertinism. I mean, it means cultural leftism and a lot of very unpleasant things. So I think that they've done damage to it. We'll just have to see, whether it sticks around in the future. But it's both alarming and disheartening that damage has been done to a great word. Leonard Reed used it. I mean, so many great men used it. Ayn Rand, of course, hated it, which is probably a good thing for libertarianism. But it's you'll have to look at this in the future and just see what happens. But it's a lot of damage has been done, and of course, the people love destroying words. Aristotle wrote about this. I mean, it's because if you can change the meaning of words, it can change people's minds and change politics and society. And this, of course, is what we're seeing right now. We saw it with feminism in the 1960s. It's happening with the BLMers now, the Blimmers. So it's we'll just have to see. But we're all in. It's a cultural fight as well as an economic fight, and we have to keep that in mind. And of course, I think that Rothbard, Hoppe, for that matter, Mises, who was very much of a cultural conservative, a super cultural conservative, would all agree that this is a very, very important part of the fight. And it's really essential to the fight, and to ignore it is a terrible mistake.
I believe I've heard you in the past say you don't vote, but there are a lot of libertarians that are finally maybe even conceding this may be the most important election of our lifetime. Of course, we have heard that throughout, at least I've heard it throughout my life.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them saying now, okay, I'm a libertarian and I'm going to support the libertarian line and the LP at some point, but this time the LP candidate means nothing, and I'm only going to vote for Trump because I have got to fight. At least he's put somewhat of a break on this craziness that's headed our way. Are you sympathetic to that sentiment at all?
No, sure I am, and it's my view that Trump does not deserve to win, but we don't deserve to have him lose.
That's
so
great.
I think that's the.
Well,
so I will root for Trump. I don't vote, as you say, but if Biden, and it's not Biden, of course, but if
right.
Kamala Harris, who's a horrendous person, I mean, she's just a sickeningly evil person, were to become president, I think it's we would be in big trouble.
What are your feelings on where things are headed? I mentioned to you earlier, I just spoke to Ron Paul, so maybe his optimism kind of got to me, but it seems to me that there are little signs that what we call the cathedral may be crumbling. It seems like more and more that normal Americans, maybe like I said earlier, they've just become red-pilled during this lockdown mess. The blinders seem to be off of them. You see Nancy Pelosi, the most recent example, going into a hair salon, and my wife, who owns a salon here, I've never heard her curse so much when she saw that, because she understands for the salon owners out there, they're not allowed to be open yet. Cathedral operatives and the elite get to go do what they want, and of course it's rules for thee and not for me. When you see things like that, does it kind of bring an optimistic view at all to you that maybe people are waking up?
Sure, I thought that was great. I mean, the great that the owner of the salon shared the footage from the security cameras, which of course Pelosi accused her of having set her up.
Yeah.
Even though, of course, Pelosi called, or her assistant called to make the appointment. She wanted to go to this place because she needed her hair dyed. It wasn't to wash her hair. It was because she needed her hair dyed. And the owner of the salon, of course, thought it was a slap in the face. Yeah. She thought that for the queen of San Francisco to be able to just waltz in, doesn't matter what the rules are, to do the things that all her former customers would love to be able to do. And of course, Nancy Pelosi is unbelievably arrogant. And I don't know how she dresses now. The only time I ever saw Nancy Pelosi was I went with Justin Raimondo, who at this point was running as a libertarian against Pelosi. She didn't have a Republican opponent. And so he was on a radio show with her, and he did very, very well. But I must say I was struck by how openly rich she was. I mean, she had very, very expensive clothes, a lot of extremely expensive jewelry, expensive shoes, and I thought, is this actually good politics? But because she's very wealthy, her husband's very wealthy, and she flaunts it. And she was, of course, talking about the poor, and all that sort of thing.
Right.
But she's extremely arrogant, extremely nasty. I mean, you can just see it from her attacking the salon owner. I fear for the salon owner losing her license.
Yeah.
The city of San Francisco will take away her license to operate a beauty salon because she allowed Nancy Pelosi to come in. Although they won't do anything to Pelosi, of course.
Right, of course. Before we get you out of here, a lot of people listening, especially my listeners, look to figures like yourself and Jeff Deist and the Mises-type libertarianism for like a shining beacon of light, really. In parting, do you have any words of advice for those going like, this is getting crazy, I don't know if I should follow the LP, what I should do in this election, what I should do, just with my family? What are your thoughts on where we're at right now, and would you give any advice to my listeners?
Do the right-wing thing. That's what you should do. So if you're going to vote, yes, of course you should vote for Trump. And to vote for a third party, if a state is close and the third party gets 2 or 3% of the vote, it could switch it. Although I was interested to see that there were some interesting surveys done a few months ago showing that the people who were going to plan to vote Libertarian would otherwise have voted for Biden.
All right, vote Libertarian then.
They would not have voted for Trump. So those people, that's fine if they vote for the Libertarian Party. But anyone who shares our views, who's concerned about the culture war, and it is a culture war, who's concerned about the war on capitalism, and boy, is that a war, and all the just what's happening in the cities where these criminals are allowed to run rampant, shoot people, and if you defend yourself against them, you're the enemy. It's like the poor couple in St. Louis or Kyle Rittenhouse. They're the enemy, and they would love to put him in jail forever, maybe execute him. 17-year-old kid. Anyway, he's. I think Murray would be going, "Yay, Kyle," and that we can say that too. But I think that we have to learn things. The most important thing is actually to educate yourself. I know that. When it seems like we're going to have to man the barricades, that may seem like odd advice, but I think we need to know some economics, we need to know some history, we need to know some political philosophy, we need to read Rothbard and Mises, and it will arm you intellectually, and that is so important. And it's also, if you know these things, good people will come to you. They will actually ask you your advice about things. And this is how the remnant, Albert J. Nock's remnant, is formed. So this is very, very important. But I think also you have to have a gun. You have to learn how to use the gun. It's very, very important. You have to learn how to use it. That's true of women, especially true of women as well as men. And have plenty of ammo. I think it's a good idea to have some storage food, just in case there's, we went through a little bit of this a few months ago, but it could happen again where food chain breaks down because of what the government is doing to farmers and to distributors and to markets. And so I think it's a good idea to have some of the storage food in your home. I've always admired the Mormons. They all have a year's worth of food in their house. Each family has a year's worth of food for themselves and also to help others. So it's a great principle. I don't know if everybody needs a year's worth, but you certainly need probably a few months' worth. And there are companies that sell this, so I think that's important. I think you have to have some gold. Who knows what exactly is going to happen to the U.S. dollar? Is it going to be amalgamated into a world digital currency, which would be a horrific thing that could be happening. We hear rumors, and certainly people have been boosting this at the various central banks. You need to own some gold, some silver. I would say almost as much as you can, and that's very, very important. And also it's very important to have a network of friends and neighbors, people who go to your church, people who can count on you and you can count on them. This is so important if society starts to break down because of what the enemies are doing to us. So that's my advice. But read, learn some things, and not only does it make you a better person, but it makes you a teacher, not somebody who's going to go up and grab others by the lapels and say, "Hey, let me tell you what's what." But people will come to you if you actually know if there's economic troubles. You can actually explain what's happening. People will come to you. So you can explain about our history. Murray Rothbard's great 5-volume history of of America before the Revolution, although he continues up through the adoption of the Constitution, which, as Murray points out, was a disaster, of course. But his Rothbard, read Rothbard, and I have some lists on LRC about what books to read and what order and that kind of thing. But it's educate yourself. If you're religious, go to church, be a loyal church member. Very, very difficult when the Bolsheviks and the government shut down the churches.
Yes.
They kept, of course, open all kinds of other enterprises, which they called essential. Churches, they said, are non-essential. For the creeps and the atheists, maybe that's correct, but not for the rest of us. So support your church, even if it's locked down. Still go to church. I mean, it's possible to have assemblies and that sort of thing. It's essential. So it's that, plus have some food, have gold, silver, a network of friends and family, and educate yourself. And those are the first. And get a gun and know how to use it. Get guns, GUNSs, and know how to use them. Make sure, whether you're a woman or a man, that you know how to use them. And we all can't be Kyle Rittenhouse. I mean, imagine here's this kid, he'd been hit in the head, knocked down. He's sitting on the pavement, and these monsters, one of them with a gun, is running towards him, and they intend to kill him. And he's entirely calm and is able to shoot and stop these people.
That was amazing.
I mean, it's the kind of thing that Marines and Army soldiers and everything very few of them can handle that. Yeah. I mean, it was just an extraordinary thing. And of course, it's another reason why they want to kill him. Maybe we need Kyle Rittenhouse for president in response to that. Yes, he would not be a libertarian candidate, of course.
Right. He might be going up against AOC in a few years. We'll see.
Well, yeah.
In closing, also, you mentioned LRC, one of my favorite websites that I contribute to financially, of course, as well as Mises.org. Can you real quick plug your stuff and where people can find all of this good stuff?
Well, it's LewRockwell.com, LAW-Rockwell.com. It's a site changes daily. It's actually 6 days a week because it's the same on Sunday as on Saturday for the most times. It deals with coronavirus. It deals with what the Fed is doing, what cultural issues, political issues, and if you're not looking at it, I think you'd find it interesting. It's got a huge archive. It's been in existence for 21 years. It's got a gigantic number of articles, great articles by all kinds of great men and women, just extraordinary writers. And take a look. I think you'd enjoy it, and thank you very much for contributing to it because, of course, we need that.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you very much, Lew Rockwell, for being here once again on Death to Tyrants. I've enjoyed this.
Oh, my pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Now that was a powerful interview. Man, oh man, the great Lew Rockwell. I know there are some libertarians out there listening that were making some screeching noises as they heard some of that stuff. I love it. I love having great voices like Lew's on the show. I will link to everything we talked about in the show notes page for this episode. Definitely the case for Paleo Libertarianism. I'll link to the book, The Irrepressible Rothbard, and Lew's books as well. I highly recommend. Also, The Left, the Right, and the State is one of Lew's great books. I highly recommend that book. And like I said, as well as The Irrepressible Rothbard. Go read those essays. What a cool collection of essays. As for us here on Death to Tyrants, you know where to find me now. It's that shiny, glossy, amazing new website called death2tyrantspodcast.com. That's where it's at. And you can find all the links on there to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So go check it out, you guys. Man, I've got another big guest coming up next week. I'm looking forward to it. I think you'll dig that one as well. Hope you're doing well, and I will talk to you soon.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Death to Tyrants podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.